Jasmine Wright is an artist, not famous, but incredibly talented. Her world is a spacious, perpetually cluttered studio in an industrial area filled with the scent of oil paints, turpentine, and her signature ginger tea. Her ancestors are from Haiti, and her paintings, even her commissioned portraits, always reflect the vibrant, life-affirming colors inherited from those distant islands. She paints to understand the world and leave her mark on it. Her life is a struggle for rent, endless sketches, and a quiet, hard-won solitude. He's Kim Jong-ko, nicknamed Tiger, the boss. Not just any mafioso, but the head of one of Korea's most disciplined and brutal clans. His world is a sterile, clean penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, filled with the scent of aged whiskey, leather, and cold steel. He's a model of control and unemotionality, having inherited his father's business and built it into an unshakable empire. His life is one of impeccable suits, lightning-fast decisions, and absolute total solitude at the very top. Two completely different worlds, separated not only by their origins, but by their very essence. They were destined to pass each other like ships in pitch darkness, but one incident on the street caused their worlds to collide. Jasmine Wright stands in front of a large canvas, completely immersed in her work. The studio smells of oil paints, turpentine, and the sweet aroma of ginger tea sitting on a stool. Brushes, tubes, and sketches are scattered everywhere. She feels at home in this creative chaos. Suddenly, a loud crash breaks the silence. The back door to the workshop, which she rarely uses, swings open, slamming against the wall. A man appears in the doorway, barely able to stand. He's wearing an expensive, yet mint-colored dark suit. He holds his hand to his side, and a dark, damp stain spreads across his light shirt. His hair is disheveled, and his face is pale with tension. But what strikes Jasmine most are his eyes. They are the eyes of a predator, filled with cold menace, but in their depths she sees something else, a desperate, animalistic weariness. "Close the door, not a word." His voice is low and hoarse, but there's an iron will in it that brooks no argument. Jasmine freezes, clutching her hand in a sweaty palm. Her heart is pounding somewhere in her throat. Instinct screams at her to run, to scream, but her legs won't obey. The man takes a step forward, staggers, and his shoulder briefly brushes the doorframe. He's tall, fit, and even in this state, he exudes a dangerous strength. "I need shelter. Now." He looks at her directly, and that look seems to root her to the spot. His thoughts are jumbled. Who is he? Who is he running from? What does he want? She sees his hand tremble, and he clenches his teeth to hide his weakness. And in that moment, fear suddenly recedes, giving way to another, older instinct, to help. Footsteps. Quick, confident footsteps are heard outside, in the alley behind the workshop. There are several of them. The man's eyes meet hers. There's no plea in them, only a silent demand and that same weariness that touches her soul. Jasmine acts without thinking. She nods sharply toward the depths of the studio, behind a pile of canvases. "Hide there, quickly!" He glides silently in the indicated direction, disappearing into the shadows between the shelves and unfinished sculptures. Jasmine rushes to the door, slams it, and turns the key. Her heart pounds wildly. She looks around. Dark drops remain on the floor by the threshold. She grabs the rag she uses for wiping up paint and quickly wipes the floor. The stains are only smeared, but now they can be mistaken for spilled paint. Then she returns to the easel. Her hands are shaking. She picks up the palette, takes a deep breath, and tries to focus on the canvas. She's painting a portrait of an elderly woman, but now the colors seem alien and lifeless. Outside, the footsteps fade. A ringing silence descends. Jasmine hears only her own breathing and the ringing in her ears. She doesn't dare turn her head in the direction where the stranger is hiding. Every cell in her body tenses. Minutes pass. They seem like an eternity. A quiet movement behind her makes her start. She turns around slowly. He emerges from his hiding place. He's still pale, but he stands up straight. His gaze glides over the locked door, over the carefully polished floor, and then stops on her. "I think they're gone," he says quietly. "I need to go." He approaches the door, puts his ear to it, and listens. He nods. "Thank you," he says again. There is no warmth in his voice, only a statement of fact. "You are an artist." He looks at the canvas. It's not a question. She just nods. "They might come back. Be careful," he says, and quietly steps out into the night, closing the door behind him. Jasmine stands motionless, trying to comprehend what just happened. She almost believes this is the end. She breathes deeply, trying to calm herself. She is alone again, in her world where it smells of paint. And then a new sound comes. Not footsteps, but the muffled screech of brakes, right at the entrance to the workshop. Then the slam of car doors. Voices. Low, indistinct. And again, a quiet but desperate knock on the back door. Her heart skips a beat. She runs over and opens the door. He's standing there again. His face is distorted with rage and pain. "All exits are blocked." His voice is hoarse. "I have nowhere to go." An icy terror grips Jasmine. They're here, and he's here again, even greater than before. She rushes to the back door, checks the lock. She turns, looking for an exit that isn't there. Her gaze falls on a pile of canvases. They'll check there first. And find it. Her thoughts race at breakneck speed. She can't give him away. She can't. Her instinct for self-preservation screams at her. She needs to change the situation, do something unobvious, turn the threat into something ordinary. She breaks through the pile of canvases to where he's crouched, pressed against the wall. His eyes are narrowed, his body tensy like an animal about to spring. He's heard everything. "You need to go out," she whispers, holding out her hand to him. "Now." He looks at her hand with a silent question, full of distrust. "Trust me!" There was desperation in her voice, overpowering the fear. He slowly straightens up, taking her hand. She pulls him toward the center of the room, to an old wooden chair littered with rags. "Sit down. Here." She sweeps the rags onto the floor. He sits up, his expression one of utter bewilderment and wariness. Jasmine grabs a clean palette from the nearest table and thrusts it into his good hand. Then she picks up a tube of paint and, with a flourish, squeezes several colors onto the palette. Ochre, umber, and white. "Hold it, like this. Don't move." She grabs a charcoal pencil and a blank sheet of paper pinned to the tablet. Her fingers tremble, but she forces them to close around the pencil. She begins to draw. Quickly, feverishly, drawing broad sweeping lines across the paper. She doesn't see his face. She sees only the shapes, the shadows, the angle of his head. She draws like never before, pouring all her panic into every stroke. And then the front door bursts open with a bang. 3 people enter the studio. They are dressed in dark, simple clothes. Their faces are stony. The first, who walks ahead, scans the room with a quick, professional glance. His eyes rest on them, on her, standing at the easel, and on him, sitting on a chair with a palette in his hands. Jasmine doesn't let them speak. She looks up from her drawing and turns to face them. Anger, not entirely feigned, but rather born of adrenaline and fear, pulses through her. "What is this?" Her voice is loud, sharp, cutting through the silence. "Can't you see? I'm working! You scared the model at the most crucial moment." She takes a step toward the uninvited guests, waving a tablet with a drawing on it. Her eyes are ablaze, and she is all indignation and creative rage. The men hesitate, their gazes shifting from her to him. He sits perfectly still, his face a mask of calm. Only his eyes, cold and attentive, follow every movement in the room. He holds the palette with an unnatural yet convincing grace. The drops on his shirt could now be mistaken for paint. "We're looking for one person," says the presenter, but his confidence is already shaken. "Well, he's not here," Jasmine interrupts, gesturing towards the door. "It's just me and my model. We're having a difficult session. Please leave. You're ruining my concentration." She turns back to the easel, demonstratively showing her back, as if they were no longer worthy of attention. There's such genuine fury in her gesture, such conviction, that it works. She hears one of them quietly say something to the other. Then footsteps. The door closes. She doesn't move, listening. The car starts and drives away. Only then do her legs give way. She grabs the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her breath catches, and a violent tremor runs through her body. He slowly gets up from his chair, places the palette on the table, walks over to her. You, he trails off, as if choosing his words. You were magnificent. There's no familiar steel in his voice. There's something new, respect, and amazement. Jasmine can't speak. She just shakes her head, still trying to catch her breath. She just did it. She tricked the armed men, and it worked. He stands next to her, and she feels his presence, heavy and real. The danger has passed, but he is still here, and she understands that her life has just changed forever. The adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by an icy, all-pervading fatigue. Jasmine sinks onto a stool, her hands still shaking. She stares at the charcoal sketch she made in panic. The lines are sharp, nervous, but his silhouette, his restrained posture, are discernible in them. Her fear is captured in these strokes. He walks around the studio, his steps slow and measured. He looks collected and in control again. His arm is still pressed to his side, but now he seems to ignore the pain. He approaches her works hanging on the walls and studies them silently. His gaze lingers on one, a vibrant, almost frantic landscape, reminiscent of distant tropical islands. Your island? He asks quietly. Jasmine looks at him, surprised. My ancestors. Haiti. I've never been there. He nods, as if this fact explains something to him. Then he turns back to her. He stops at a respectful distance, giving her space. My name is Kim Jong-ho, he says, that formal iron note returning to his voice. But those who know me call me Tiger. Jasmine nods silently. The name means nothing to her, but the nickname seems appropriate. It speaks of danger, strength, and loneliness. You risked yourself, he continues. Twice. You showed ingenuity and courage. Such things do not go unnoticed. He takes a thin, dark leather wallet from his inside jacket pocket. He takes out not a business card, but a plain white sheet of paper. It has only one phone number printed on it. I'm not used to being in debt, he says, handing her the piece of paper. It goes against everything I've been taught. But today, I'm indebted to you, to Jasmine Wright. She looks at the piece of paper, then at him. She doesn't want to take it. To take this piece of paper would be to acknowledge the connection. It would be to leave the door to her life ajar for this person, for this world. I don't need anything, she says quietly. It's not a question of desire. His tone leaves no room for argument. It's a question of rules, my duty. If you need anything, any help, any problem, you call this number. Only me, no one else. His gaze is heavy, unwavering. She understands that refusal will be perceived as an insult, as a violation of some unwritten law by which he lives. Slowly, her fingers touch the paper. She takes it. The paper is cold and smooth. I hope I never have to call, she says, looking straight at him. The corners of his lips twitch for a moment, as if hinting at a smile that never came. I hope so too, he replies. For your own good. He takes another look around the studio. His gaze glides over the paintings, the colors, her face, as if memorizing every detail. Then he nods, a brief, almost imperceptible nod. A farewell and a confession all at once. He turns and walks out the same back door. This time he closes it quietly, carefully. Jasmine sits alone in silence. In her hand, she clutches that very sheet of paper. It feels incredibly heavy. She looks at the door, then at her drawing. It depicts him, the tiger, frozen in a calm that was just a mask. She stands up, walks over to the easel, and slowly, very slowly, tears off a sheet of paper. She crumples it into a tight ball and holds it in her palm. Then she walks over to the trash can, raises her hand over it, and stops. She unclenches her fingers. The crumpled drawing lies in her palm. She can't throw it away, just as she can't throw away that white sheet of paper. She places both the drawing and the piece of paper with the number in an old tin box where she keeps her most prized possessions. She closes the lid with a dull thud. She hopes this is the end. She hopes she'll never see him again. But deep down, she already knows this meeting was only the beginning, and her quiet, paint-scented world will never be the same again. A week passed, 7 long days during which Jasmine tried to return to normal life. She cleaned the studio, tried to paint, brewed ginger tea. But she saw shadows everywhere. Every screech of brakes on the street made her flinch. She hid the tin box with the number and the drawing on it on the farthest shelf, trying to forget. But he didn't forget. He reappeared that evening, unannounced. Not through the back door, but through the front. His entrance was quiet, and therefore all the more impressive. He was dressed in an impeccable dark suit, his shirt showing no sign of the wound he was hiding. 2 of his men stood beside him, equally silent and stony-faced. They remained at the entrance, forming a living barrier between her and the outside world. Django himself entered the workshop like a master surveying his new possessions. His gaze was clear, lucid, without a trace of the fatigue he'd felt back then. "Jasmine," he said her name, and it sent shivers down her spine. "What are you doing here?" Her voice sounded sharper than she intended. "You said this was the end." "Circumstances have changed," he replied, coming closer. He wasn't trying to be friendly, he was businesslike. "The people who were looking for me are now looking for you. They saw you throw me out. They're asking questions. You became a witness." Jasmine felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "I didn't see anything. I don't know anything." "They're not so sure. To them, you're a weak link, a vulnerability." He paused, letting her understand the weight of those words. "They'll come for you. If not today, then tomorrow. And this time, your palate won't stop them." "What should I do? Run?" Her voice took on a note of panic. "Running away is the first thing they expect, and the last thing I can allow." He stopped right in front of her. He smelled of expensive perfume and cold metal. "I have another proposal. It's not up for discussion." Jasmine looked at him silently, sensing something terrible was about to happen. "You will spend a month with me, in my residence, under my protection. Outwardly, it will look like my new passion, my new companion. This will explain your disappearance from the workshop and my interest in you. It will confuse them. They will not touch what they will assume belongs to me." Recoiled, stunned. "Are you asking me to pretend to be your lover?" The word hung in the air, crude and obscene. "I'm offering you a role that will save your life," he corrected her, his voice devoid of embarrassment. "It's a business necessity. In a month, this whole thing will blow over. They'll lose interest in you. After that, I'll disappear from your life, forever. You'll be generously compensated for the inconvenience." "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Jongho slowly glanced around her studio, her paintings, her colors, her world. "Then I can't guarantee your safety, or the safety of this place. You made your choice when you let me in. Now you have to live with the consequences." It wasn't an offer. It was an ultimatum, beautifully wrapped in words. She had no choice. Running would mean becoming a target. Staying would mean waiting for them to come for her. His offer was her only chance, albeit a terrifying one. I need to pack my things," she whispered, feeling the traitorous tears welling up in her eyes. "You have 15 minutes, he said, turning to the window. "Take only the essentials. Brushes, paints. You can paint with me." It was the last straw. Even in this monstrous situation, he thought of her art. It broke her resistance. She nodded, unable to utter a word, and went to her old suitcase, feeling the walls of her world crumble, replaced by the walls of a gilded cage. His residence turned out to be less a home and more a fortress. A high fence, cells, silent guards on every corner. Inside, spacious, minimalist rooms in cool gray and beige tones. Everything was spotlessly clean, expensive, and lifeless. There was no scent of paint or ginger. It smelled of money and melancholy. She was given a private suite with its own bathroom and a view of the enclosed courtyard garden. The room was beautiful, but alien. It was soulless. Their performance began that same evening. He led her into the dining room, where his men, those same stone-faced men, were setting food on the table. He touched her back as he led her to the table. His touch was light, yet commanding. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "Relax," he said quietly, and only she heard the words. They have to believe it. He served her food and poured water. His table manners were impeccable. He spoke to her calmly, asking questions about her work and her writing technique. She answered monosyllabically, unable to look up at him, feeling the heavy gazes of his subordinates on her. They watched their every movement, their every word, and she understood that any mistake would be noticed. That's how the first few days passed. She barely left her room, trying to paint, but the canvas remained blank. She was tormented by a sense of loss of freedom, the humiliation of this role. Everything changed on the fourth day. Late in the evening, unable to sleep, she went into the living room to pour some water. He was sitting in a large armchair by the picture window, looking out at the city lights. He was holding a book in his hand. He was without a jacket, and in the dim light, he seemed less dangerous, more, human. Hearing her, he turned his head. "Can't sleep?" "I can't get used to it," she admitted honestly. He nodded. Aisun, looking at his glass of dark liquid. "The silence here is oppressive. Sometimes I can't sleep myself." He put the book down. It was a book on art history. "Would you like some tea?" "Yours, the ginger one. I told you to buy it." This simple gesture touched her more than all his threats. He remembered. She nodded. He stood up and headed for the kitchen without another word. She heard him turn on the kettle. He returned with 2 cups, handing one to her. They sat in silence, looking out at the city at night. It was the first moment devoid of falsehood. "Have you drawn anything?" he asked. "No, I can't." "Because I'm here?" "Because everything here is alien. Art needs its own territory, its own air." He thought for a moment. "Tomorrow, your studio will be brought here. Partially. Easels, paints, your sketches." She looked at him, not believing her ears. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your talent shouldn't suffer because of my problems," he answered simply. "And because these walls lack life. Your paintings, they breathe." At that moment, she saw in him more than just the gangster nicknamed Tiger. She saw an intelligent, lonely man who valued beauty and silence, but was a prisoner of his own situation. The next day, as he'd promised, her easels, paint box, and sketchbook were brought into her room. The faint but unmistakable scent of her studio filled the sterile air. She picked up a brush and made the first stroke. It wasn't a portrait, not a landscape, just splashes of color. But it was a beginning. That evening, he came to her room again. He didn't enter, but simply stood in the doorway, watching her work. "I won't disturb you," he said, and left. Their performance for their subordinates continued. They dined together, feigning interest in each other. But now their performance took on new, subtle nuances. A glance lingering a second longer, a question asked not for the record, but out of feigned curiosity. A silent understanding between 2 people trapped in the same trap, but for different reasons. She was still a prisoner. He was still her jailer. But somewhere deep within that golden cage, a strange, fragile bond began to grow, built on silence, art, and the knowledge that beneath the boss's mask lurked a man just as lonely, staring out at the lights of the big city. The month was drawing to a close, and Jasmine began to slowly pack. The thought of returning to her studio, to her old life, brought on a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief, because this luxurious prison was weighing on her. Anxiety, because she had become accustomed to a certain rhythm, to Jong-ho's strange but steady presence in her life. One evening, he entered her room without knocking, as he often did. She was standing at her easel, finishing a small sketch, a view from her window of the inner garden. "Your month is almost over," he said, stopping behind her. She didn't turn around, just nodded, drawing the final line. "Yes, I've almost packed everything." "I saw." He paused. "Are you ready to go back there? To that void?" Jasmine finally turned to him. "This isn't emptiness. This is my life. You won't have the money to pay the rent there. You'll be back to scraping by with odd jobs." He said this not with malice, but as a statement of fact. "Your talent is worth more. What are you proposing? Extend our deal?" Her voice was bitter. "No, I'm offering a new one. An honest one." He took a step forward, his gaze serious and businesslike. "Become my personal artist." Jasmine looked at him, not understanding. "You're... what?" "I'm paying. A lot. Crazy a lot by your standards. You will document my life, my encounters, my people, my possessions. You will draw everything you see, the way you see it." Stunned, she sank onto a stool. "You want me to keep an artistic diary of your activities?" "I want someone with your gaze to capture my world. Not photographs, not reports, but feelings, colors." He gestured around her room, her paintings. "You see more than just what's in front of your eyes. You see the essence. I'm interested in what essence you see in my world." It was shocking. On the one hand, it sounded like a continuation of captivity, just in a different flavor. On the other, he offered her access to a world she'd only known about from the news. A world of power, money, secrets. As an artist, she couldn't help but be drawn to it. It was a challenge, unprecedented and dangerous. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because you're not afraid of me. Because you're the only person in recent years who's looked at me and seen more than just tiger. And because your paintings..." He hesitated, searching for the right word, a rare occurrence for him. "Are truthful." He wasn't just offering her money. He was offering recognition of her talent in its twisted form. And a chance. A chance to see the underbelly of a life she knew nothing about. She looked up at him, her gaze direct and firm. "I agree, but on one condition. Speak. I'm not responsible for any crimes. I won't be a witness. I won't draw anything illegal. If your job involves anything like that, I'm leaving. Immediately. No discussion." He studied her face for several long seconds. There was something in his eyes, not anger, but rather respect for her courage. "Accepted," he finally said. "You will attend only legitimate meetings. Business negotiations. You will draw portraits of my associates. Types of my property. You are an artist, not a witness." Something vaguely resembling a smile appeared on his lips. "So we have a deal?" She took a deep breath, feeling her heart pounding. Was she selling her soul, or was she buying her freedom and the opportunity to create like never before? "Deal." The next day, she received the contract. The amount of the fee made her eyes widen. It was enough money to last her for years of comfortable living. She signed it with a trembling hand. Her first day began with a business meeting in his office. Two of his subordinates, the same ones who had been standing by the door of her workshop, sat across from him. They discussed imports, logistics, and figures. Everything sounded dry and legal. Jasmine sat in the corner with her tablet. At first, she felt awkward. They were talking about containers and routes, and she was trying to capture their bowed heads, their rigid profiles, the way the lamplight fell on the table, leaving their faces half in shadow. She wasn't capturing a negotiating scene, but an atmosphere of intense concentration. One of the men, the older one named Mr. Kim, occasionally glanced at her warily. But Jong-ho acted as if her presence was a given. He ignored her, completely immersed in the discussion. When the meeting ended and the men left, Jong-ho approached her. "Show me." She handed him the tablet. On it was a quick but expressive sketch. It wasn't photographically accurate. She captured Mr. Kim's sternness, his partner's youthful focus, and the detached power of Jong-ho himself, sitting at the head of the table like a captain on the bridge of a ship. He stared at the drawing for a long time. "Interesting," he finally said. "You didn't draw a deal. You drew power." That evening, he paid her his first advance. The money arrived in her account, and she stared at the figures with a feeling close to panic. She had just received a fee for sketching a meeting of people who, she was almost certain, were not ordinary businessmen. She had crossed the line, but on the other side, a whole new world awaited her, ready to become her canvas. From that day on, Jasmine's life changed dramatically. She was no longer a prisoner. She was an employee with unprecedented access. She accompanied Jong-ho to business dinners at expensive restaurants, sat in the corner, and sketched his associates. She visited his legitimate businesses, a designer boutique, a coffee shop chain, a business center under construction. She sketched portraits of his subordinates, from stern security guards to young, ambitious managers. But the most powerful paintings were those she created without commission, those that were born when she was alone with him at his residence. One night, passing his office, she saw him at his desk. He sat hunched over papers, his shoulders hunched with fatigue. His face, usually a mask of absolute control, was relaxed and tired. The lamp on the desk cast a soft glow, highlighting only his figure and the pile of documents. She returned to her room, grabbed a canvas and paints, and began working. She wasn't painting a mafia boss, she was painting a man. Tired, lonely, carrying a burden on his shoulders, invisible to the naked eye. She painted him by the living room window, looking out at the city at night, his back, the back of his head, his shoulders, defenseless in their reverie. The city light beyond the glass was blurry and bright, and his figure was dark and motionless. She hadn't planned to show him this. These were her personal observations, her secret glimpse into the man she'd begun to see behind the mask. But one day, he entered her room unannounced, as he often did, and saw the unfinished portrait. He paused on the threshold, examining it silently. Jasmine froze, expecting his wrath. After all, she had dared to expose his weakness, his humanity. He came closer, his eyes fixed on the canvas. "Is it me?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered, preparing for the worst. "I don't look like that," he said, but there was no indignation in his voice. There was curiosity. "This is how I see you, sometimes." He stood before the painting for a long time, studying every detail. "No one has ever seen me like this," he finally said. "No one would dare." Then he turned and walked out of the room without saying another word. Jasmine thought she'd made a mistake, but the next day, he acted as usual. Something, however, had changed. The way he looked at her had acquired a new depth. And as if, with her ability to see the real him, she had become a kind of mirror, one he was afraid to look into, yet was forced to. These paintings, these unofficial portraits, forced him to look at himself anew. He ran his finger across the canvas where his tired eyes were depicted, and something akin to understanding appeared in his own gaze, an awareness of the price he paid for his power. An even more surprising change occurred in his subordinates. At first, they viewed her with suspicion, but seeing that their boss not only tolerated her presence, but clearly valued her work, their attitude began to change. Mr. Kim, that stern subordinate, stopped her in the hallway one day. "Miss Wright." He nodded at her with unexpected respect. "The boss showed me the portrait you drew. You got the point." He was referring to his portrait, where Jasmine depicted him not just as a brute, but as a devoted, experienced soldier in whose eyes one could see not only toughness, but also a tired devotion. They began to treat her not as a lover or a hostage, or even as an employee. Her presence, her art, became something of a talisman. Her paintings hung in Jong-ho's office, and people who came to meetings saw them. They saw themselves and their boss in a new, unusual light. not as criminals, but as people with their own history, their own destiny. One day, a young manager she'd once sketched brought her a cup of that very ginger tea. "I heard you like it," he said sheepishly. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She became part of the ecosystem, a member of the family, a fragile but significant cog in the machinery of this strange, dangerous world. One evening, looking at her latest painting, a portrait of Jongho overlooking the city, she realized she no longer wanted to leave. Her own studio, her old life, now seemed flat and insipid. Here, in the eye of the storm, she found not only inspiration, but also something that reminded her of family. Distorted, dangerous, but family nonetheless. And he, Tiger, transformed from a threat into the most interesting person she had ever met. And her greatest enigma. Everything changed with the arrival of So-jin. She entered Jongho's office without knocking, like a hurricane, dressed in a perfectly tailored steel-colored suit. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, highlighting the ruthless geometry of her cheekbones. She was his business partner, the head of an influential clan with whom Jongho was building a fragile alliance. Their relationship was based on mutual benefit and a razor's edge. Seo-jin immediately noticed Jasmine. Her sharp gaze slid over her, sitting in the corner with her tablet, and Jasmine felt like a lab mouse. "Jongho, I didn't know you hired a chronicler," So-jin said, her voice sweet as honey and cold as ice. She sank into the chair across from him, not sparing Jasmine another glance and miss. "Wright is an artist," Jono explained calmly. "She documents my work." "How sweet!" "So-sa." Jin smiled, and there wasn't a drop of warmth in her smile. "Activity? I didn't know your business was so aesthetic." The meeting was tense. They discussed territorial division and financial flows. Seo-jin spoke harshly, assertively, constantly testing boundaries. Jongho retorted with cold confidence. Jasmine tried to concentrate on her sketches, but she felt Seo-jin's gaze on her, as if she were trying to figure her out, to understand her true role. When the meeting ended and So-jin left, a heavy silence fell over the office. "It's intense," Jasmine noted cautiously. "Seo-jin doesn't forgive weaknesses," Jongho snapped, shuffling through papers. "And he doesn't tolerate outsiders." From that day on, So-jin began appearing more frequently, and each time, her attacks on Jasmine became more sophisticated. She didn't shout or threaten. Her weapons were caustic remarks, thrown out as if inadvertently, and disparaging glances. One day at a business dinner, So-jin, sitting next to Jongho, asked loudly, "Tell me, Jongho, does your artist understand anything about what we're talking about? Or does she just draw pretty pictures?" Jasmine blushed, feeling everyone at the table looking at her. Jongho replied evenly, but his fingers tightened slightly on his glass. "Oh, I'm sure." So-jin smiled. "It must be so fascinating, watching grown-up conversations like a schoolgirl on a field trip." She openly called her a bohemian mouse, a girl with colors, emphasizing her alienation from their world in every way. She asked Jasmine tricky questions about business, knowing she wouldn't be able to answer, and then shook her head in feigned sympathy. "It's okay, my dear," she said. "You're here for beauty, not for brains." Jongho cut off her outbursts, but he couldn't control her every word. The atmosphere grew tense. Jongho's subordinates, already accustomed to Jasmine and respectful, now sensed the tension. They saw Seo-jin trying to push the artist out, and understood that this was a challenge not only to her but to Jongho himself. Jasmine tried to ignore it. She immersed herself in her work, drawing with renewed vigor. But the constant humiliation and venomous glances were taking their toll. She began to feel like an outsider again, an uninvited guest. Her hard-won confidence began to melt under the onslaught of So-jin's cold, calculating hostility. One evening, as Jasmine was leaving the residence for some fresh air, a car pulled up. She rolled down the window, and inside she saw So-jin. "Sit down," she said without preamble. "Let's have a woman-to-woman talk." Jasmine hesitated. So Jin asked softly, a wicked glint playing in her eyes. No, Jasmine answered and got into the car. They rode in tense silence. So, Jin finally said, not looking at her, you're a temporary distraction, a pretty toy. But his world is cruel. Only people like me survive there, and people like you break. I'm not a toy, Jasmine said quietly but firmly. Oh yes, you're an artist, So Jin chuckled. You see the essence. Well, take a good look. His essence is power, and you're in the way. You're a weakness his enemies can use against him. And if you truly want what's best for him, you'll disappear, on your own. The car stopped at the park. Seo-jin turned to Jasmine, her face serious. Leave before it's too late, because next time there won't be any warning. She opened the door, signaling the end of the conversation. Jasmine stepped out, and the car sped away, leaving her alone in the gathering darkness, with an icy lump of fear in her chest. Seo-jin's words hung over Jasmine like the sword of Damocles. She tried to talk to Jongho, but he brushed her off. Seo-jin tries to push where he sees weakness. Don't pay attention, he said, but Jasmine read a slight worry in his eyes. A few days later, Seo-jin returned to the residence. She was unusually kind. She brought Jasmine some expensive tea and invited her to go to an art gallery downtown. I want to make it up to you, she said with a charming smile. I was rude. Let me make it right. Seeing this, Jongho nodded to Jasmine. Rest. It won't hurt you. Jasmine didn't trust Seo-jin, but she couldn't think of a good reason to refuse. And a secret hope that perhaps they could truly find common ground made her agree. Jin's car was luxurious and quiet. They drove along, making small talk. Seo. Jin asked her about art, seeming genuinely interested. Jasmine's tension began to ease. Perhaps she'd exaggerated? Oh, I forgot something in my office, Seo-jin said suddenly, turning into an unfamiliar alley. It won't be long. She stopped the car in front of an unremarkable building in an industrial area. Wait here, I'll be there in a minute. She stepped out, clicked the lock, and the car door closed. Jasmine was left alone. 5 minutes passed. 10. Everything was deserted and quiet. Anxiety began to creep up on her again. And then she saw them. 2 men emerged from around the corner of the building opposite. They walked straight toward the car. Their gait was quick, purposeful. There were no questions in their eyes. Jasmine instinctively reached for the door handle. Locked. She darted to the other side. Same. She was trapped. The men came closer. One of them rapped his knuckles on the glass. Come out! His voice was muffled, but brooked no argument. At that moment, Seo-jin emerged from the building. She stopped a few meters away, arms crossed over her chest, and watched with a cold, indifferent expression. She had orchestrated this whole thing. It was a trap. Jasmine recoiled from the door, pressing herself against the opposite window. Her heart was pounding. She saw one of the men take out some kind of tool. And then, with a screech of brakes, 2 black SUVs burst into the alley. The doors swung open, and Jongho's men leaped out like lightning. There were about 6 of them, and they moved with frightening coordination. A swift, brutal fight ensued. The 2 attackers didn't have time to realize what was happening. They were quickly subdued, overpowered, and bundled into one of the SUVs. The whole thing took less than a minute. Jongho himself opened Seo-jin's car door. His face was pale with suppressed rage. He didn't look at Seo-jin. His gaze was fixed on Jasmine. Come out, he said quietly, his voice shaking with anger. She crawled out of the car, her legs wobbly. He grabbed her arm, not painfully, but firmly, and almost pushed her into his SUV. Only then did he turn to Seo-jin. He walked right up to her. He didn't shout. He spoke quietly, but every word was like a honed blade. You've crossed the line, Seo-jin. You've touched what's mine. If you ever look in her direction again, our alliance will fall apart, and your clan will fall after you. I will destroy everything you've built. Do you understand me? Seo Jin, all her arrogance vanished, nodded silently. Her eyes were filled with shock and fear. For the first time, she saw his true anger. Django turned around, got into the car next to a trembling Jasmine, and they drove away. The car was deathly silent. Jasmine looked out the window, but she didn't see the city. She saw the faces of those men. She saw Sojin's cold eyes. She saw the fury in Jungho's. She understood that she had just been a bargaining chip in their conflict, and that her salvation had been purchased at the cost of a display of absolute ruthless force. He brought her to the residence and showed her to her room. Rest. No one will dare touch you again. He turned to leave. Zhu Hongko, she called quietly. He stopped. You them. She couldn't pronounce the word. He turned around. His face was tired and stern. I protected what was mine. Nothing else matters. And he walked out, leaving her alone with the horror of the price he was willing to pay. A price that those two in the alley had perhaps already paid. The next day, Jasmine tried to get back into her usual routine. She went to her room and approached her easel. On it stood an unfinished portrait of Jongho, the one where he looked out over the city. She picked up a brush and dipped it in paint, and her hand froze. Her fingers wouldn't obey. They trembled. She tried to make a stroke, but the brush slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor, leaving a blue blotch on the parquet. She raised her brush and gripped it with all her might, but her hand felt numb. There was a vacuum inside. That quiet room where images were born, where colors and lines formed into pictures, was empty, filled with only one thing, the white, piercing horror of that alley. The cold metal of Sojin's gaze, the dull blows of the fight, and the quiet, poisonous voice of fear that whispered, "Did you see? Now you know. You're part of this." She couldn't draw. The days merged into a single gray blur. She sat in her room and stared at the blank canvases. They seemed vast, terrifying white abysses to her. She picked up charcoal and tried to draw simple lines, but they came out crooked, jagged, and full of despair. She tried to paint something else, flowers in the garden, the view from the window. But her gaze kept returning to the dark corners, to the shadows that now seemed threatening. The paints on the palette mixed into dirty, lifeless tones. Jongho noticed it almost immediately. At first, he didn't show it, thinking she needed time. But a week passed, then another. Her room, always an oasis of creative chaos, was now spotlessly clean. The canvases stood untouched. He came to see her one evening. She was sitting on the windowsill, hugging her knees, looking out into the garden. "You're not working," he stated. "No. Why?" She slowly turned her head towards him. In her eyes, he saw not the determination or fear he knew, but emptiness. A blank, bottomless emptiness. "I can't. All I see, all I feel, is horror. And horror cannot be turned into art. It can only destroy it." He came closer. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. "You won't be touched again. I gave my word." "That's not the point!" Her voice rang out with unexpected force, almost hysterical. "The point is, I understood. I understood the smell of real fear. I saw what real cruelty looks like. And I understood that your world, your power, they're built on this. And by painting it, I became a part of it. I became an accomplice." She fell silent, breathing heavily. "I can't look at you anymore and see just a person. I see the one who ordered those people. I see the one who could do such a thing. And I can't draw it. I don't want to see it." He stood before her, and for the first time in their entire acquaintance, something that could be called guilt appeared on his face. Not remorse, no, but the understanding that he, without meaning to, had broken something fragile and important. He had destroyed her gift, her way of seeing the world that he so treasured. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but she recoiled as if from the touch of hot metal. "Jasmine!" He didn't know what to say. All his words seemed empty. "Please go away," she whispered, turning back to the window. "Just go away." He obeyed. He left her room, and for the first time, he felt not like the master of the situation, but like the loser. He had saved her life, but he had destroyed her art. And this realization was more bitter than any bullet, any threat from enemies. He looked at the empty canvases in her room and saw in them a silent reproach, a reflection of the emptiness he himself had brought into her life. The silence in the residence became thick, heavy, like lead. Jasmine turned into a ghost. She moved silently through the rooms, her eyes empty, her arms hanging helplessly at her sides. Jong-ho watched this disintegration, and something shifted inside him. He, who had always valued business and power above all else, suddenly realized that the loss of her art, her soul, was an unacceptable loss, worse than any failed contract. He saw her looking at the paints, not with love, but with disgust, as if they were something that reminded her of that alley, of its true essence. He tried to talk, offering everything that came to mind. A new, better studio, a trip anywhere in the world, the purchase of any paint collection. She only shook her head silently. It couldn't be bought. The problem wasn't the conditions, but himself, his world. And then he made a decision, the most irrational, the most insane of his career. He summoned So-jin to a final meeting. She arrived confident, with a cold, victorious smile. She thought he would soften, make concessions after that incident. Their clans were preparing to sign a multi-million-dollar contract that would strengthen their alliance for years to come. The meeting took place in the same office where Jasmine had once done her first sketches. Now her chair in the corner was empty. "I'm glad you've come to your senses, Jong-ho," So-jin began, examining the documents. "Our union will bring us both enormous benefits." Jong-ho sat across from him, his face impassive. "Benefit is a relative concept, So-jin." "Oh?" She looked up at him in surprise. "There are things that are more valuable than money," he continued calmly. "More valuable than connections. More valuable than power." She slowly lowered the papers. "And what is this?" Calmness, talent. A person's right to see the world in colors, not in the black and white schemes of power. So-jin looked at him with growing distrust. "Are you talking about that artist?" "I'm talking about Miss Wright," he corrected her, his voice taking on a steely edge. "You took away her inspiration. You broke her. And now I'm giving it back to her." He picked up a thick folder containing a draft contract from his desk. Without looking, he tore it in half. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the quiet office like a gunshot. So-jin froze, her mouth hanging open. Are you crazy? These are millions. This is our future." "My future self is now lying in her room, unable to lift a brush." His voice was quiet and terrifying. "Our business relationship is over. From this moment on, our clans will no longer cooperate. You are my competitor, and I will treat you accordingly." "Because of some bohemian mouse?" So-jin hissed, jumping up, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Because you touched what's mine," he corrected her. "And remember, if the shadow of your presence falls on her doorstep again, I will crush you and your business into dust. That's not a threat, it's a promise." He turned to the window, signaling the end of the conversation. "Seo?" Jin stood there for a few more seconds, shaking with rage, then turned abruptly and ran out of the office. The news of the deal's collapse spread like wildfire through his organization. People whispered in disbelief. Mr. Kim, always reserved, allowed himself to raise an eyebrow. Jong-ho had just burned one of the most lucrative bridges of his career. And all because of a woman who wasn't even his official partner. Jong-ho didn't bother explaining anything. He went up to her room. She was sitting in the same place, by the window. "It's over," he said, stopping behind her. "So-jin is gone. No more dealings, no more contacts. She'll never approach you again." Jasmine turned slowly. He saw bewilderment in her eyes, not gratitude. "Why? This deal was so important to you." "Some things turned out to be more important," he answered simply. He didn't expect an immediate miracle. But the next morning, as he passed her room, he caught a scent. The pungent, familiar smell of turpentine. He peered inside. Jasmine stood in front of the easel. She clutched a tube of paint. Her fingers were stained with blue ochre. She hadn't made a single stroke yet. She simply stared at the white canvas, and then at her hands. At the paint, which was just paint again, not a symbol of horror. She cried. Quiet, stingy tears rolled down her cheeks and fell to the floor. But these weren't tears of despair. These were the tears of someone learning to breathe again. Junko quietly closed the door. He didn't disturb her. His sacrifice, his crazy, irrational act, was beginning to bear fruit. And for him, a man who always took pragmatic steps, this was a strange and new sensation. He had done the right thing. Not the right thing, not the strategically correct one. Simply the right thing. Inspiration returned to Jasmine, not like a gentle wave, but like a hurricane. The silence that had been within her was now filled not with emptiness, but with a hum of energy. She worked day and night, rarely leaving her room, refusing food, forgetting about sleep. But her paintings had changed. Gone was the soft, almost tender insight with which she had previously painted his portraits. Her brushstrokes became sharper, bolder, almost crude. The colors were more clashing, with bright splashes juxtaposed with muted, dark tones. She painted that very alley, not as a place of fear, but as a place of power. The shadows in her paintings weren't frightening, but rather potent. She painted Jonko's face after that fight, not tired and humane, but petrified with rage. Yet this rage, in her painting, didn't look terrifying, but justified. She processed her fear, filtered it through the prism of art, and transformed it into something else, into power. Jonko felt a slight dizziness. She was showing him himself, but who he was in moments of extreme tension. And in her interpretation, this didn't look like cruelty, but like an act of absolute will. His people, seeing these paintings, began to look at him with even greater, almost religious awe. Jasmine hadn't simply returned. She had returned renewed, stronger, and her strength involuntarily strengthened his authority. One day, she came to him with a request. I want to exhibit. He looked at her in surprise. Exhibit? Where? In the city. In an ordinary gallery, not in your world, in mine. He hesitated. It was risky. Bringing her, his personal artist, his talisman, out in public? But he saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had restored to her at the cost of millions. Okay, he agreed. But with security. She didn't argue. The gallery was small but respected. The owner, an elderly man with sparkling eyes, was delighted with her work. He said it had a raw, unbridled power. She selected several paintings for the exhibition, those new, bold works, as well as one she had painted earlier. A large canvas she called Tiger's Shadow. In this painting, Jonko was depicted with his back to the viewer, against a backdrop of a city map dotted with lines resembling blood vessels. The painting itself was dark and muted, but in the corner, where his shadow fell on the map, a subtle but poisonous green tint appeared. Jasmine was simply a play of light and metaphor. She wanted to convey the duality of his nature, the apparent calm and the hidden, wild energy. The exhibition was a success. Critics praised her bold technique, and buyers were interested in her works. Everything was going well, until they came to the exhibition. Representatives of the Park clan, Jongho's main rivals, visited the incognito gallery, and when they saw the painting Tiger's Shadow, they froze. For them, that green shadow on the city map wasn't a metaphor. They saw it as a direct insult. Green was their color, and the shadow, falling precisely on those areas that were the bone of contention between their clans, they perceived as an open threat, a hint that Jongho intended to devour, to shadow their territory. The next day, Jongho was summoned by his men. Mr. Kim's face was grim. Boss, the Park clan, they're furious. They believe we publicly insulted them with this artist's painting. They demand the painting be removed from the exhibition and a public apology. They view this as a declaration of conflict. Jono, sitting in his chair, looked at one of Jasmine's new paintings hanging in his office. It depicted himself looking out the window, and behind his reflection in the glass, the outline of a large predator was visible. "What?" he asked, confused. Mr. Kim explained about the green shadow and the offensive symbolism. Jong-ho wanted to laugh. It was ridiculous. But then he understood. In his world, everything had a double meaning. Every word, every gesture, every color was interpreted like a chess move. They tried to squeeze Jasmine's art, so direct and sincere, into their own shabby framework of intrigue and innuendo. He stood up and walked over to Jasmine. She was standing in front of the easel, covered in paint, alive and radiant. "My exhibition is a success," she told him joyfully. "Yes," he replied. "It was such a success that the Pak clan announced a game for us." He explained the situation to her. Her face fell in amazement. "But that's absurd. It's just a color. It's just a shadow." "There's no just in my world, Jasmine. Everything is a weapon, even your art, especially now that it's become so powerful." "What are we going to do?" she asked, fear flashing in her eyes again, but this time it wasn't paralyzing, but something worse. Jong-ho looked at her new, unfinished painting. It depicted the two from the alley, not as victims, but as dark, almost abstract silhouettes, clashing with the equally dark, but more defined figures of Jong-ho's men. The painting radiated conflict, confrontation, but not fear. "Nothing," he said. "We won't do anything. The painting will remain on display. But the conflict, let them do what they want," he shrugged. "If they want to see a challenge in your painting, let them see it. If they want to become enemies over art, well, that will be the strangest thing in my life." He left, leaving her lost in thought. She looked at her painting. Before, her art had been an escape from reality, then a documentation of it. Now it had become her reality. It could hurt. It could provoke. It could start something like this. She approached the canvas and boldly swept it with a broad brush, painting a new, even more vibrant and aggressive stroke. If her art had become a weapon, well, she would learn to use it. And her first shot was a refusal to remove the painting. Her silent defiance. The game had begun, and for the first time, she felt not a victim, not an observer, but an active participant. And this feeling was both terrifying and intoxicating. It happened as she was returning from the gallery. The security car was forced to brake sharply due to a supposed accident ahead. The next moment, the doors burst open and she was yanked from the car. Someone threw a bag over her head and gagged her. The struggle was brief and futile. When the bag was removed, she found herself in a small, windowless concrete room. A single light bulb burned in the ceiling. The door was metal, with no handle on the inside. It smelled damp and moldy. Panic gripped her, wild and animalistic. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. But strangely, this horror was familiar. It was the same horror from the alley, and just like then, her mind, conditioned by years of observation and analysis, began searching for a foothold, screaming, no use. Crying? That's what they were waiting for. They were waiting for her to break, to become a victim. In the pocket of her light coat, she felt something she'd always carried with her since childhood, a piece of charcoal for sketching. Old, worn, familiar. Two people entered the room. The same ones from the alley? She didn't remember. Their faces were strange, but their expressions were familiar. Cold, indifferent. "Just sit quietly and you'll be fine," one of them, the older one, said. They walked out, latching the door. Jasmine was left alone. The trembling in her hands gradually subsided. She clutched the coal in her fingers, and then her gaze fell on the wall. Rough, unplastered concrete. A perfect surface. She didn't think about salvation. She didn't think about what would happen next. She thought only about not going crazy. And the only cure for madness was art. She walked up to the wall and drew the first line. uneven, trembling. Then another. She began to draw what she saw. The face of the man who had just spoken to her. She recalled every detail. The scar above the eyebrow, the shape of the cheekbones, the particular line of the lips. She worked quickly, furiously, pouring all her rage and fear into the drawing. When the door opened again, and they entered, they froze on the threshold. They saw themselves, their portraits, painted with terrifying precision on the wall of her cell. She stood next to them, covered in black dust, her eyes glowing, looking at them with cold, silent assessment. "What is this? What are you doing?" one of them growled. "I'll keep that in mind," Jasmine replied quietly. Her voice was even, without a tremor. "Just in case." She turned to the other wall and began sketching the next man. She captured the tattoo on his neck, an intricate design that could have been an identification mark. She drew details, the buckle on his belt, a scratch on his watch. Her calm was frightening. It was unnatural. They expected tears, pleas, hysteria. Instead, they received a silent chronicler who documented their appearance with chilling precision. She transformed them from faceless captors into individuals with recognizable features. It robbed them of their power, their anonymity. "Stop it!" one of them shouted, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Jasmine ignored him. She continued drawing. She sketched the ventilation grate on the ceiling, the broken floor tiles, the unique rust pattern on the door. She was turning her prison into a map, into evidence. They took the coal from her. She found a nail on the floor and continued scratching out images. Her cold, methodical clarity frightened them far more than any screams. They feared not her, but what she knew about them, and what she left behind. Jong-ho was furious, so consuming that everything around him seemed to turn red. They dared to touch her, again. This time crossing all boundaries. His men combed the city. There were interrogations, threats. But the Pak clan had covered their tracks well. 2 days passed, no leads. Jong-ho sat in his office, clutching the very lump of coal he'd found in the pocket of her discarded coat. He felt helpless. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control of the situation. And then Mr. Kim called him. His voice sounded strangely agitated. "Boss, we found something. In an old abandoned warehouse at the port. The caretaker we questioned said he saw someone being brought in, but that's not the main thing. We found drawings." "Drawings?" Jong-ho didn't understand. "On the walls. In the basement. Portraits. Details. It's her, the boss. It's her work." They burst into the basement an hour later. The first thing Jong-ho saw were portraits on the wall. 2 men, with scars and tattoos. He recognized them. They were Park's men, mid-level ones. The drawings were done with such stunning precision that there was no doubt. But that wasn't all. Next to it, she drew a ventilation grill and an arrow indicating the direction the wind was blowing. She drew the view from the crack under the door, a piece of rusty pipe, and part of the brick wall of another building. She scratched a floor plan of the room with notes. She left them a map. Not in ink, but in charcoal and a nail. Her artist's memory and observation proved more accurate than any GPS tracker. He rushed to the metal door at the end of the basement. His men broke it down in seconds. She lay on the floor in the corner, her back pressed against the wall. She was pale, smeared with soot and dust, but alive. When the light from the hallway fell on her, she slowly raised her head. There was no fear in her eyes. There was only a deep, bottomless weariness. When she saw him, she didn't rush toward him. She simply slowly opened her fingers. In her hand lay a crumpled, dirty scrap of paper, a label from some box that had been lying in the corner. On the back was a sketch, his face, drawn in this dark from memory. The lines were nervous, broken, but they contained his essence, determination, strength, the very thing she had once feared, but now, apparently, had become her only point of support. Jong-ho approached, knelt before her, and silently picked her up. She didn't resist, simply resting her head on his shoulder, clutching the very same drawing. He carried her out of the basement, out of the darkness, into the light. His men surrounded them, but he saw no one but her. He saved her. But this time, she saved herself by giving him the tool to save her. They owed each other a debt, and that debt was stronger than any contract. She hadn't painted for a month. This time, it wasn't emptiness, but a deep, heavy wound that was slowly healing. She lived in his residence, but now it was her home. His people looked to her not as a talisman, but as an equal, as someone who had endured a trial and not broken. Jongho didn't press her. He waited silently. He saw how she occasionally picked up a brush, looked at it, and then silently put it back. He saw the unhealed trauma in her eyes. But he also saw strength. One morning, he walked into her room. "Get dressed. I want to show you something." He drove her through the city. They stopped in front of an old but sturdy building in a quiet neighborhood. It was a former factory. He led her inside. The space was enormous. High ceilings, huge floor-to-ceiling windows, through which perfect northern light poured. The floors were wooden, polished. The walls were white brick. Everything was empty and clean. It smelled of wood, paint, and fresh air. "What is this?" Jasmine asked quietly. "This is your new studio," Jongho replied. "Only yours. No one will enter here without your permission. No one will dictate what you draw. Draw whatever you want, or don't draw at all. This is your space." She walked slowly through the empty hall, her footsteps echoing. She approached the huge window and looked out onto the street. This wasn't his world behind the high fence. This was an ordinary cityscape, her world. In the center of the room stood a single easel. On it lay a clean, primed canvas. Next to it, on a stool, lay a new palette and a box of paints. Every color. She stood there for a few minutes, simply staring at the canvas. Then she slowly approached. She ran her hand over the rough surface. She picked up the palette and chose a tube. Blue. The color of the sky. The color of freedom. The color of his eyes the moment he carried her out of the basement. She squeezed paint onto the palette. She picked up a brush. She made the first stroke on the canvas. Broad, bold, full of confidence. This was more than just color. This was the beginning of a new painting, a new life. She understood that her world would never be the same. It bore the scars of alleys and basements, but there was also room for color, and for him. For the man who had burned bridges for her art, and who had learned to wait. She turned around. He was standing at the entrance, in the light pouring in from the window, watching her. He wasn't smiling. But in his eyes was what she'd seen in that crumpled drawing from the basement. Determination. And something else. Something that didn't need words. She turned to the canvas and applied another brushstroke. Their shared story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And now she had her own territory, her own palette, and her own choices.